The numbers are just the first place where the company, in a way, stops lying to itself.
With the advance of AI, there's just too much data, there is so much information, too many voices, split opinions. We've never been this fragmented as human species before.
When a CEO says the numbers don't make sense, what they really mean is, I don't like what these numbers are telling me. I don't want to do an episode about Excel. Narghiza, welcome. I'm really glad we're doing this. I wanted you on because you sit in a weirdly powerful place: finance, HR, data, people. And that's where companies usually get exposed, right? Because the leaders love saying we need better numbers, but a lot of time the numbers are not the problem. The numbers are just the first place where the company, in a way, stops lying to itself. So before we get into the mess, give people the short version. Who are you? What do you do? What kind of problems do companies usually bring to you?
Absolutely. Hello, Marko. First of all, nice to meet you. Thank you for bringing me to the show. As you mentioned, weird is a good headline to start with. Weird is a great place to be in this day and age. You're right. With the advance of AI, there's just too much data. There is so much information. There is saturation of it. In fact, that too many voices, split opinions. We've never been this fragmented as human species before. So, yeah, I would say from where I stand in terms of finance, I have a lot of tools. Do they affect my ability to do better business? Yeah, it's an interesting one because doing business has become extremely, extremely complicated. The advance of tools and robotics doesn't necessarily equate to being more profitable, to being more successful. In fact, it's become far more competitive than it's ever been. So yeah, it's an interesting twist to running a business.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's exactly why this is interesting to me, right? Because I don't want to do an episode about Excel, right? Especially given that you're in finance. No offense to Excel. Excel has suffered enough, right? I want to talk about what the spreadsheet reveals, right? Because sometimes when a CEO says the numbers don't make sense, and we heard it a lot of times, right? What they really mean is, I don't like what these numbers are telling me. So let's start there.
It's an interesting one, Marko. I actually love the question for the reasons of, say, this time 10 years ago, that was the Bible, because everything 10 years ago was easily predictable. Past was a good predictor of future. But it's almost not the case anymore, because what you look in data-wise today, you'd be lucky for it to last a couple of days if you can rely on it a few minutes before it completely goes berserk. So, operating in this market where disruption is every Tuesday, change is every Wednesday, new regulatory requirements are every Thursday, and then certain laws haven't quite caught up with the advancements in the robotics. Do you know what I mean? We're still operating within a legal environment which is about good 20 years too old, and things are happening which are about 40 years too far ahead. So it's become an interesting space where your dance, when you tiptoeing around requirements, has become like a river dance. Do you know what I mean? If in the past was, salsa, you kind of got a little bit of pace. It's literally intense Irish river dance. I hope that answers your question.
And when you hear the numbers don't make sense nowadays, what do you hear behind it? Is it usually nowadays bad data, or it is usually the company not agreeing on what the reality is, maybe?
Yeah, so it depends. It really does, because I've been to a business that, they were putting a new venture together, and it had a lot of merit, owners poured a lot of capital to make that happen, and they had third parties, like pretty decent big fours involved in, what they do, they forecast, they put all these risk metrics, and there's 24 of them, quite a saturation of risks of what may go wrong if this business doesn't take off. But mind you, none of it included COVID because they didn't know COVID existed at the time. But guess what happened? After they've presented the report and owners poured millions of dollars, and the next month was like shut down. So, like I said, it depends because nobody envisaged risk number 25, and that was unknown, and that was COVID. So what I would say in today's market is that portion of unknown has become so much more bigger. If you say, yeah, there's about 90% known and 10 contingency. In today's market, you'd say, look, 50-50, probably a good start. It's a very scary place to be. How quickly the occupations are changing. Things are becoming automated, and we subconsciously, me even not realizing we're talking to robots today, right? We cannot probably really perceive properly at this stage how much more we are communicating with AI and robots, because it's becoming day to day. But if you look at our environment today, we're thinking probably a good 30-40% of what we do today is AI, but we don't look at it that way. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so short answer to your question is data has become not as reliable as it used to be. Yeah.
And that's the dangerous part, right? Because the numbers don't make sense, sounds like a finance issue, but it's sometimes a leadership issue as well, right? The number is fine. The room just doesn't want the consequence of the number, right? And that's where it gets messy in a way.
Yeah. So see, in the old days when you have a CEO lining all of the C-levels and going, y'all lot not performing because you told me this would be $1 million and it's only $5. It's becoming harder to pull the lot together and blame them because the external factors influencing all of our cumulative decisions, where we can basically put our hands on our hearts and say, like, tomorrow will be exactly like today. No, it's very hard. It has become this way. So greater leniency, greater understanding is required at all levels to become more accepting of the fact that there are more scenarios now that we can't control, circumstances where we didn't envisage things to go the way they did. So staying more agile and open, probably better approach than being the old style where I wanted it this way and it doesn't work. That would definitely lead you to a path of some form of self-destruction. Yeah.
And then let's talk about messy spreadsheets for a second. Every company has one. That file nobody in a way wants to touch, right?
Yes. 100%. It happens everywhere. I mean, come on. I mean, I've got a good one. I actually have a good one. There's a company that this is a classic. There's a company that operates off I believe they're an equivalent of Google Sheets. Okay, bad practice. Don't ever do that, especially when you got stuff overseas, and it has a tendency of taking hours to sync. Do you know what I mean? So someone's done updates from their end from somewhere overseas, Southeast Asia, and they've basically called me up saying, like, done, it's ready to go. And I've taken it and it hasn't sunk yet. And I'm looking at the data, which is about 4 hours too old. And I'm running with it and I'm making all these decisions and I'm looking at executives and I'm saying, well, that's what it is. No, it's become messier than ever. Yeah.
And there's so many files that nobody wants to touch then, right?
Oh, God, you've got
where
no
one
idea.
person knows how it works, and if that person goes on holiday, the business suddenly becomes a crime scene in a way, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Look, I mean, I've got a good example, right? And it's kind of taking me out of finance, but it still talks to the fact that it's become a very, very volatile world. Look at the music industry. In the past, the way to progress in the music industry would be you get labeled, a record label would manage you, and then whatever the record label does, they elevate you and they turn you into a star. You know, in nowadays, record labels have no power because you can become a star by presenting your song at the wrong time in the right platform and hitting the wrong button and accidentally going viral. And you do not need a record label. In fact, record labels are struggling like you wouldn't believe because Katy Perry's last 3 albums didn't hit the mark. She poured tons of money into it. She's got a label that kind of is out there. And none of it achieved the results she desired. But then there's one-star wonders out there that never thought their song would ever see the daylight, and there they are. Do you know what I mean? It's just become that messy. Yeah.
And does a messy spreadsheet tell you something about the actual company, or is just so random?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it does because I've come from heavy industries, which means we tend to use a lot of spreadsheets, right? And mind you, with all the robotization, I would still say we still rely on spreadsheets because there's a lot of modeling that goes on. There's a lot of forward forecasting. Some companies I worked for with forecasting to 40 years. There's very few ERPs out there that allow you that kind of long data forecasting when you go from brown fields to green fields to blue sky to cosmos and no sky. Do you know what I mean? So spreadsheeting is quite popular. And yes, the quality of the spreadsheet definitely tells you about the contingent demographic skill set in the company. And the better it is, the more you realize, yeah, these people are really into their modeling. And the more sophisticated the modeling is, the more complex what it really represents is the complexity of the industry. And I'll give you an example. I mean, I worked for a builder that did master planning, and it wasn't just mum and dad's like home master planning. It was planning for retirement villages. Retirement villages are notoriously complex industry to operate in because within Australian retirement, village, I guess, environment, you never actually buy a home. You rent it for, I think, either 99, don't quote me, 39, I think it's 39 years. And it's a very unique, one-of-a-kind rent. It's not a typical, like, I rent it or I lease it. It's more like you get to 39 years, there's like a deferred management fee. When you sell it, we take a portion of a capital gain, we give another portion to your children. Like, it's really complicated. So when a tenant moves in, you start the forecast into 39 years. This is what I'm telling you, 40 year comes into the picture because you start forecasting, well, when it hits the 39 years, but 39 isn't just a straight line. Within the 39, these people go through, self-care where they're totally self-sufficient. Then they go medium care when they lose certain abilities, they get older. Then they go into high care when they need a nurse full-time, and this whole forecasting goes from level 1 to level 2, and it gets really, really complicated. And then there comes a point in time kids get involved because, they want to find out what's the capital gain, what's their share of the will. All of these needs to be factored in. And yeah, it's one of those. That would be a pretty difficult spreadsheet.
Yeah. Because from my lens, a messy spreadsheet is rarely just a messy spreadsheet, right? Sometimes it's unclear ownership with cells around it in a way, because nobody owns the input, nobody owns the definition, nobody owns the final version, you might say, but somehow everyone wants to trust the output to the spreadsheet, right? Which is insane when you say it out loud, right? But in a way, that's the red flag you notice when a company is running on spreadsheet chaos.
Yes. Look, you could say every ERP is a bit of a black box, right? Spreadsheet is a black box. And so is an ERP because a lot of them are built on the same logic. They've got tables and tables and tables of interrelated data that they spit out into a report. Someone needs to enter it and someone needs to run it, right? So it can be quite messy because if you don't continually check the logic, and I'll give you a good example, like in Australia, we often go through legislative changes in relation to, for example, minimum wages or superannuation percentage to be paid out, which is your pension, right? If you don't have the means to check the black box and the black box doing the right thing and applying the right percentage starting from the right day, do you know how many companies got caught out being fined for underpaying employees because they had no idea the software either wasn't updated or updated incorrectly or picked up the wrong state or the wrong percentage. And these people haven't actually gone out to thieve from employees. These people thought the black box was doing the right thing. But when they did get caught, can you imagine? There's just no mercy in it because the first thing you do, you hit the media as the corporate that stole millions of dollars from their own employees. So there is a bit of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Where does trust in these numbers actually come from? Because every leader wants accurate data, right? Of course, but accuracy is not the whole game. As you mentioned, the number can be accurate and still not be trusted in a way. So what makes a leadership team actually trust the numbers?
The best leadership, I guess, outlook in terms of numbers is that you must know your business. You don't need the numbers or the granular level of numbers to know that high level numbers don't look right. This is where your true leadership comes in, because if you rely on these numbers and you don't have a hunch to tell you otherwise, you don't know your business. There needs to come a point where you need to be able to question them because you know what transpired, you know what you bought, you know what you did, and what sort of activities you undertook, and then all of a sudden, like, bang, a number, and you go, this number doesn't make sense. That line of inquiry takes a lot of expertise. This is where the expertise is very, very important, you know. And I've been to places where lack of that expertise led to constant querying of and digging into sands, right? If you're spending billions and you're all hung up on $3 and there's 6 of us, you know, costing the business about $3,000 in man hours looking at 3 cents, we're clearly not efficient. Do you know what I mean? Those teams that look at it more high level and then interpret it far more high level are far more successful than the ones that are so much more granular. The ones that are hung up on a small parts and missing the bigger picture where, come on, but guys, every minute you spend here disputing $3, you're missing on sales for the ride. Do you know what I mean? But it depends. Companies go through tough times. This is where you kind of start looking at smaller figures because they become important, which is understandable. But more successful teams in my career have been those that were more strategic. They weren't hung up on smaller things, you know, foregone dollar. They were more interested in how do I bring $2, you know, and that's what made them more successful. Yeah.
Yeah, because if every bad number turns into blame and pointing fingers, people stop bringing clean truth out, right? They bring edited truth in a way. And then I feel the CEO says, why am I always finding things out too late? Well, because the company made honesty expensive in a way, right? Bad numbers turn into blame, right? And people, in a way, stop bringing clean truth, if you can say. They edit things, they polish the truth, so it's just safer, right? And then leader, CEO, founder always says, why am I finding these things too late, right? Well, company made it or made honesty expensive in a way by lack of trust. So what do you see usually leaders do to kill honesty around numbers without meaning to?
Yeah, so the most toxic attitudes would probably be the kind where, you know, numbers are really a reflection of your success as a team, right? Good numbers is reflection of your success. Poor numbers are reflection of your underperformance as a team. So the toxicity start from not being a team. by being a department and blame shifting, in the sense, if this department didn't do this and they could have should have done this, this is where the fracture begins, because there is no one single department that should be responsible for overall performance. If the numbers aren't good, it is everybody's issue, not just tendering or sales, you know what I mean? But then it gets even deeper, because it's not enough to put into the department. You need to find the person. You need to make it an issue with an individual, and then you drive him out of the business because it's his sole responsibility. Coulda, shoulda. It never works like this. Do you know what I mean? This is the next level of toxicity, and it gets, so there's a third level. In the third level, you've run out of people to blame. You then go back to finance and accounting. You go, your numbers are incorrect. You can't get me the right numbers because I fired everyone I could, and you still keep giving me wrong numbers. I'm thinking like, well, the problem lies in your thinking now. This is the most dangerous level of toxicity a company could reach, where you then start wondering and questioning your own numbers from finance, because you can imagine we just conduits. You go do stuff and then we'll just give you the numbers saying, well, that's what you've done. We have no incentive for you to do good or bad. Most of the time we're neutral. Okay. Sometimes we can be quite, out there, but largely we mean well. Our intention is to support and help, and, clearly, blaming the messenger is probably it's where you start noticing the breakdown in the business. So I've been to a company, I remember joining one business, it's literally my week 2. And then I'm realizing the business is in distress because this tension, this stress levels and conversations are quite high strung. And all of a sudden we're getting pulled into a meeting, and this is my week 2. And they pull up a survey, which I didn't even participate because I'm so new. And in that survey, they're basically trying to understand what is wrong with us and why we're not making any money. So the stakeholders are responding, and like they're putting up that response on the board, like massive screen. And it's saying like, finance is letting us down, because look at we're losing credibility because of finance, because they don't pay on time. And it's like dig after dig after dig on finance. And I'm thinking, why would I have a reason not to pay on time? And I'm thinking, this business has cash flow issues. Bang. Finance will have no reason to sit on anyone's invoices and wear your negativity. If I could, I'd just pay everything in advance. Do you know what I mean? But the minute you start hearing comments like this, and they've even done a survey where they've normalized that this is that issue, I'm like, this is going to be an interesting job for me. Do you know what I mean? There's like 99 of them, and I'm alone trying to convince the business, like, hang on a second. We have a problem.
Exactly.
Much bigger than finance. Yeah.
And that's the whole game nowadays, right? Because in a way, mature team asks, what do we need to do now? A defensive team asks, who made us look bad? Same number, totally different company in a way, right?
Yeah. And I mean, gone on off the same company, right? Like, it's a multi-million-dollar turnover business, but cash flow wise, I mean, my average day will be, one of our warehouses, they switched off electricity because we haven't paid for 3 months, and people coming to work in the warehouse, and there's like 18 of them can't get in because the roller door wouldn't open and they can't turn the lights on. And it's really $3,000 bill that I don't have in the account. So in the morning I get a phone call. So I'm like, well, we need to pay. Why did you not pay it? We can't get in. So I'm like, well, the bank's like overdrawn. And the next issue, literally 2 hours later, like, I hired a company car and you guys didn't pay it. And now they're chasing me for that, invoice. And they're trying to affect my personal credit rating. And he's quite frustrated. So, and it's another 2,500 to the left. And I'm thinking, well, my day is split. Even if I had 3,000 right now, Do I choose the electricity or do I save these guys? I'm thinking, I love his job. And then I go to surveys and then they go like, oh, we lost credibility because of finance. I'm thinking, you guys have no idea what is happening. It's nothing to do with finance. Yeah.
Yeah, you're close to finance and HR, which I think is a killer combination, right? Because finance sees the pressure in the money, HR sees the pressure in the people, right? And usually these two things are connected way earlier than leaders want to admit. So, what do finance and HR see before leadership says we have a problem?
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely interrelated. Do you know what I mean? When you know you know that there's a certain profile the company goes through in terms of operational spend, decision making, and you kind of get a handle of forecasting, and then you train people. What since we put a forecast together, the whole purpose of the forecast is that you maintain that regime of forecasting. And I found the hardest part in all of this wasn't the fact that people didn't understand, comprehend, cooperate. I found that a lot of mid-tier, top end, they're quite keen because everyone comes into a workplace wanting for a workplace, the business to succeed. The biggest danger to the business is actually the top end, either the owners, that kind of thought, well, I can go swipe my card, I can make all these decisions, not consulting with the rest of the team. And it's as sad as it is. These are the people that shoulda, woulda, coulda had the most vested interest for the business to succeed, but it's their decisions largely and the way they steered the boat that led us to where we are. And then we all sitting in the same boat thinking, how do we get ourselves and them out of it? But the next hard conversation is really, like I said, is them understanding that numbers are the image of their performers combined. It's not just us that did it. This has been my reality in the sense that, typically you bring people put in, people work hard. They do want the company to succeed. It's more convincing top end to say, guys, yeah, really, you really need to consider your own actions and whether or not they were conducive. So you need to walk the talk, and then, do you know what I mean? Like if you put all these policies and processes, you got to kind of consider that you need to be part of it as well. So yeah.
And that's super painful because in a way the company usually had the signal, right? They just didn't connect it. Owner, let's say. Finance had one piece, HR had another piece. Operations feel it every day in a way. But
Yeah.
the owner reacts when it becomes expensive for him, right?
Look, pretty much so. It's probably a very simplistic expression, but it's probably most accurate as well. Because when I see cash flow issue coming out, and I can see in construction, for example, it's driven by pipeline. If you don't have an ongoing supply of new pipeline and the pipeline dries up and you've got people on payroll, well, guess what you start forecasting next? Redundancies, right? It's very hard because there's a part of me that goes, I've kept forecasting and telling you, stop doing A, really focus on B, you should have, could have, would have gone, done sales instead of, I don't know, implementation of some very expensive something. If you don't have sales, it defeats the purpose, having all these know-how. And this is where I'm thinking, well, it's not great because redundancy denotes it's a clear sign that you're not doing great. It's also a sure way to basically erode the culture because people lose faith in you going, oh, but, can we trust you? 100%, the two roles are very, very interrelated. And as someone in finance, I see that happen perhaps a lot sooner than the rest. My job is to raise my hand. My job is to, continue communication dialogue. And I have to admit, there are circumstances where it's just out of our control. Things do happen. The markets of all the fuel prices go over the board. Come on. we didn't forecast it. We never knew this would happen. And yeah, we're doing our best. Like I said, the markets have become so volatile. Disruption is just another Tuesday now. Yeah, and we need to respond as best as we can.
Yeah, I see so many companies asking for more reports all the time, especially now in the age of AI, where you're overwhelmed with million reports and stats, right? But then sales has one number, finance has another, operations has another, and now the CEO is sitting there like referee with a laptop, right? Now we have World Cup, so it's a relevant topic, right? So, what do you see more often in a way? Not enough information, or it's just too many competing realities?
Yeah, my perspective is it's far more dangerous having too much information that conflicts than having fewer and people more confident that the general gist is that, we made 1 million and we kind of all agree. It does need to be exact $9,339. We get it, it's 1 million. It's when you've got hundreds of data sets and it's digging into why is 1,000 and 1,001, being so pedantic about that $1. Just too many sources of truths that drives you into two different directions. That's probably hardest environment to be in, because that environment fosters a belief of my data is superior than yours, and it creates fractures within organizations and drives behaviors. Yeah.
And it's such a CEO pain point, right? Because now, in a way, the CEO is not the deciding the business issue; they're deciding whose numbers they believe, right? Which is not leadership. For me, that's in a way babysitting reality, right? It creates tons of decision load because every decision has to go back to the person who can break the tie in a way.
Yeah, I mean, true. It does foster trust issues. I mean, it could go beyond, like it could really escalate from that point on. If you're in that culture, I mean, come on, it's so easy to get caught in it. And then you got people that you trust more than people you trust less. It just becomes such a toxic environment. You're right. And to be honest, it doesn't necessarily have to be the wrong data set. It could be timing of data. I cut it at 3, he cut it at 3:05, and the data moves. And so we're bickering over 3 cents because we're not realizing it's just 3 cents added to $35. Do you know what I mean? Simple things like that. So yeah, in my world, it's probably easier when you've got less data, but more reliable data than way too many of it. And you really don't know how to digest it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, sometimes every department, as I mentioned, has its own number. But is that really a reporting problem, or is it an ownership problem in a way?
And even
Because
communication, right? I mean, how hard is it to line up your ducks, talk to the other department, and come up with a point in time to cut the data set, agree that unless these two data sets agree, we're not running it. We need to make sure that we agree before we go out to the world. To be honest, you can have a huge state of the art technology, but ultimately people make it and people break it. If you don't have the right people and culture, it doesn't matter how many reports you run and what you do with them. You're still a fractured company. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and companies have a lot of confident opinions in spreadsheets, right? Someone prepares the report, someone else argues with it, someone else uses it, but nobody owns the consequence in a way of that report. So in a healthy company, who should actually own the number? Is it the
Yeah.
owner?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's an interesting one because you're right. As you get higher, even interpretation of numbers become political debate or angle because you walk into a room and the person of influence is quite a strong personality, highly networked, visible person in the organization. So you need to confront that person. You need to influence that person. So, to bring to his attention these numbers and the set of conversations you would have with these people will be very different to, for example, someone who you can influence pretty quickly. That could be a much faster, more direct conversation. So as a leader, you need to be very comfortable to confront in a healthy way everyone. Do you know what I mean? There should not be people I can confront, people I can tiptoe around and confront his, junior. I'll go off his junior and I'm hoping he gets the message. No. Go off at the right person. Do you know what I mean? We'll be in a meeting where, there's one person's really one culprit, but then everyone else get told off because, we're the ones that happily wear it, but then the guy that wouldn't wear it just sits there like, why won't you all do your jobs? You're all letting me down. And I'm thinking this whole message was for you, actually. You clearly got lost in translation. So even dynamic like that, and it's quite common, do you know what I mean? Where your leadership span and your leadership, how would I call it? Your ability to handle tension may not be quite there. So you kind of spread yourself amongst those that you can influence and avoid that kind of tension. And the guy that you need to have tension with, you don't. And the issue continues. So it does come back to your own personal resources and your ability to identify who you need to talk to, how you need to talk to, and in what setup that needs to be delivered, how fast you need to talk to, because it could be an endemic issue that needs to be addressed then and there. And you need to be brave enough to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because in a way, I think leaders sometimes expect the dashboard to do the hard part for them. It can show the problems, right? It cannot make the decision for you, as you said, right? Especially when there's ego involved, and all of us have ego, leaders even more, right? Men times 3, right? So unfortunately, the data won't make decision for you. So in a way, where do companies overestimate what clean data can do, actually?
Yeah. I think when you've got trust in the data, and you can only do so, especially when there's a lot of teams involved, is when you've got teams actually working together. Do you know what I mean? Everybody comes together and everybody agrees. It's like, estimating from the Philippines and then talking to marketing in India, and you ask the same question and you're getting the same answer. That's the best place to be. But like I said, it's not so much about the dashboard. It's about the common understanding that the dashboard we built together does that, and that is reliable, accepted method we use to build a common understanding of where we are performance-wise. Because if that component missing of people agreeing, communicating, that dashboard is just useless tool of one department gone, but mine is showing 5, yours is showing 6 bars, yours is red. Like I said, ultimately it comes down to people functionally working together and agreeing on data. Data on its own is nothing, of no purpose, no use, if it's not backed by people and their beliefs that this data is useful, relevant, and accurate.
Exactly. I mean, clean data can remove excuses, right? But it cannot create courage. That part is still leadership.
That's right. 100%.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, I feel that even with the podcast, right? I don't love being on camera. I hate hearing my own voice. Editing yourself is brutal. It's like a free therapy, right? With bad lighting. But I care about the work more than I care about being comfortable. It's same with numbers. And I think that's the deal now. The tools are everywhere. The platform is there. The excuse is not to be a good leader because you have all the tools. And the hard part nowadays is being willing to be seen while you're still getting better, right? And own your decisions. And I think companies have the same problem in a way. They don't always need another tool. Sometimes they just need to stop hiding from the uncomfortable thing the tool already showed them, right?
Yeah, that's right. And just so I just comment a little bit when we say, poor leaders or bad leaders. I don't believe in the concept of poor bad leadership. I just think there's leadership that isn't understood or leadership that didn't culturally fit into organization. When you recruit a leader, clearly he's done well somewhere else. He had merits and qualifications and experience that you relied upon in getting him on board. It doesn't necessarily make him a poor leader. It just means that, it's a good one, because often what happens is that you have an appetite for what he can bring and his expertise, but you're mentally not ready for that much change. And I've seen that happen so many times, where you buy something and you want them to do the same thing that the other guy did, that you let go, and you wanted it to be different, but you just weren't able to adjust yourself mentally and psychologically to say, for him to do the new thing I want him to do, I need to change myself, and that is probably the bigger problem than the problem of, but you're a poor leader and I don't like you. It's more, I haven't been able to pace up with you, nor transform myself to accept what you could possibly bring to the table.
So in a way, where do leaders use, or do they sometimes use, we need better data as a polite way to delay the decision and buy time?
Yeah, look, it does happen, where leaders believe, oh yeah, we need to rerun certain data or recut. So no, I mean, this is an everyday event. Do you know what I mean? I've been to a business where we did valuation about 6 times because we needed to make a call about, what this business was worth and what we're paying out to investors. So the decision got delayed by about half a year. We reran it 6 times. We involved different consultancy companies, and every company had their own take and view on it. It's quite common, yeah, when you recut and seek new versions of that data. And I have to say, sometimes it does have a merit, because I've been to a company where valuation, when we finally engaged KPMG, they had a whole new way of looking at it, and they basically said, "Oh, we can change the valuation if we say, well, this was a particularly rainy year and it's abnormal." It kind of falls outside of business as usual and normal business kind of operation. So if we remove all these rainy days and we put normal days instead, and we said, if this wasn't a rainy day and it was a normal trading day and we did 5,000 instead of 3, we'd be a better business. Can you imagine? Valuation was great. We were like, oh my God, we could do that. Let's change the sunrise and just, put another cloudy day and send them all to work and tell them that we could have done 10 grand if we just had a cloudy day every day. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but it's a life actually real event that did happen. Yeah.
And why do numbers become emotional? That's my question. Because on paper, numbers look neutral, but in meetings, they can light the room on fire, as you said. Why does that happen?
Yes. I mean, don't you love it when you walk into the room and you present, well, this is what you've done all of last year, and then you suddenly see raccoons after kitchen fire. Do you know what I mean? Like, no way. Yeah, it becomes particularly emotional. You find when you're doing great that these meetings are far more inviting. There's more planning, positive reinforcement of what we're going to do in the future, reinvesting of these funds. When the company isn't doing great, they become really difficult conversations, and people would become really emotional. I'll give you one example. Leadership bonuses are hinged on the numbers. If the numbers aren't doing great and you're not getting your bonus, or you haven't achieved your KPI, or your job's on the line, can you imagine? Would you be calmly sitting in the corner and not defending yourself? And that's what I'm saying. The meeting that got to that level where one needs to wear the blame already shows that the business running a toxic culture. It's never a case of one did it. It means you allowed for the one to do it and you watched it to happen, because it should have been our combined responsibility to put guardrails for the one not to do it, or all of us to do it the right way, whichever way it is. It could have been outside of our control to start with, but in a meeting where you watch one defend himself, you know, it is toxic. It is. It's hard. Yeah.
The number itself is not emotional, right? The consequences, right? Number just points at something, right? A missed target, for example. Sometimes a bad
Yes.
plan, weak manager, cost nobody wants to own in a way, or a promise that should never been made in a lot of cases, right?
That's right. I found, and this is an interesting one, the cultures where you look at failures as learnings, they did a lot better, and you came in as a group and like, okay, so this is what's happened. And the last terminal event happened when Andrew went out and pushed that button. Yeah, but before Andrew went and pushed that button, we all went and opened the door and shut the blinds and whatever, we
And why
all
did he push the button?
Well, I've been to places where like, tell me who did it, and I'm thinking, what would that achieve? So I'll bring him to be slaughtered in the meeting. You'll make him feel this small. He won't be happy for a very long time. Or we all come together and we say, you know what, we could have, should have, would have helped Andrew. We should have told him, Andrew, stop pushing those buttons. Do you know what I mean? And we should have said, it's all our combined failure and opportunity to learn. We're not going to do it next time. That constructive feedback works a lot better because it reinforces positive behaviors. It reinforces job satisfaction, the trust that you need to come back to work and say, like, I can trust my manager. She's not going to throw me under the bus. Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't always work that way. So, and like I said, when you're in a meeting and you know that one's paying for the rest, you are in a troubled business. If not financially, then culturally. Because the businesses that do better is those that recognize that there is never a one person that should have taken the load. It's always a team of people, a group of people, or the business that should acknowledge that there's an opportunity to grow, opportunity to learn.
Yeah. And which numbers, in your experience, make leadership teams the most defensive?
Bottom lines, especially when they are linked to, so I'll give you an example, projects, when you own your own project's bottom lines and you were supposed to deliver margins of hypothetically 12%, and there's been an erosion. It's quite understandable, especially in an environment. I'll tell you, there's so many examples where, you sign a project manager to run this show, but he is denied a responsibility, ownership over choosing his own suppliers. Or, you bought a project and it's like, well, this is your project. It's a multi-million-dollar project. You better make sure you get 13% bottom line. But you deny him an opportunity to choose his own staff and you give him stuff. And come on, let's be honest, I came into jobs where I thought like, oh my God, this department is a zoo. I have to run this department and change the culture. This would take me 3 years to turn this around. How did you guys get this department to where it is today? These people hate each other, My doors are revolving doors of people complaining about it. I'm like, why don't you sit together and tell each other what your issues are and, just go have a glass of wine and be done with it. So an example will be where project managers come in and literally there's a legacy team with legacy issues. They have nothing to do with his mission, his KPI, but he's stuck with it. He's stuck with, supplies that he has to work with. He can't choose his own. He's stuck with processes that don't work for him. Can you imagine? He's literally set to fail. These are the circumstances where then you're having conversations where he is trying to tell you, but come on, guys, it's not like you've done a lot for me to succeed. And it then becomes curlier because literally like, oh, the guy before you did great. No, clearly not, because he's not here anymore.
Either you fired him or he left for a reason, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And if a CEO or COO is watching this and their team keeps arguing about the numbers, what should they look at before buying another flashy tool?
Yeah. Uh, mirror, check your numbers. Don't go too far. Really check your own numbers. I've had great experiences with CEOs and those that, the top end decision makers. Those, so for example, everyone, from certain level down have accountabilities. They have people that would oversee them, and then there's very top that literally, the gods, they do whatever. This is where it becomes really dangerous. And one day I remember, the company's hit three figures of impairment. We're running insolvent. For weeks I was sitting next to a consultancy company that basically did insolvency, and the bank ordered them to sit next to me, and somehow I got chosen to be there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm the right face or the name. Like, I want to sit next to her because she'll tell me everything, So he'll come from 8 o'clock and then to 5 o'clock, she'll be like watching what I do, asking me questions. I'll take him for a tour, and clearly it's intimidating because I want the business to succeed, but at the same time, I'm under the microscope. And then he'd ask me the question, does your manager know that, you do all these? And then does he understand your numbers? And I'm thinking, of course, we all know we're not doing great. So clearly those were very trying times. And, I'm emotional. I come to work to be monitored. Do you know what I mean? And there's so much hangs on the back of what I do and how I do every day. And it depends on the report. This guy issues, and if the report is positive, we get finance, and the report isn't positive, we're doomed. And can you imagine coming to work and everything hangs off you? Can you imagine what my nights look like after I finish work? Because I come home, my day job begins with managers. What did he say? Was he happy today? And I'm thinking, I can only do this to I have to do my day job and keep him happy and look, happy myself. It's emotionally exhausting space to be. But I remember being in that space, and then I'm watching the top two guys, and we've just gone through six wave of redundancies, and it's really weighing me down. And I'm watching them sitting and giggle in the corner. They're watching the video. They've done a presentation someplace else, and they're watching themselves on the video, and it's so funny. They're giggling, and I'm thinking, am I the only one, emotionally down? I'm worried. I really want this company to succeed, and these people just, I don't know. It was like, do you guys care? Get off your video. Stop watching yourselves. You've done great. The presentation was fantastic. Come back to work. We are running an insolvent business. So, like I said, in my experience, it has been largely a case of, where it wasn't bottom tier that didn't perform. They bent backwards. Mostly, it wasn't the middle tier. It wasn't the upper tier either. It's really top end where things go fundamentally wrong. It's one decision that costs millions, or decision not taken on time, or not executed correctly, or executed too late. That these are the kind of things where they swing the boat the most.
And what is one leadership problem you wish companies would stop hiding inside spreadsheets? Because I think every company has one spreadsheet that is carrying way too much emotional weight, right? The budget is not really a budget. It's in a way, a fight about priorities. The forecast is not a forecast. It's fight about confidence, right? So
Yeah.
what the leadership problem do you see hidden in spreadsheets all the time?
Yeah. I would say two things, right? Don't run a spreadsheet if you don't use it. If you don't live and breathe it, if you said I'm spending $5 and you want to spend $7, don't run it, because you're going to go spend $7 anyway. It's easier to spend $7 and come back and I tell you spend $7 and we're in trouble. Do you not put a spreadsheet that says you would do $5 and we do it every month, and every month you got, oh, I'm sorry. Do you know what I mean? There comes a point in time where I'm like, I don't care. I'm done putting spreadsheets for you because you clearly don't respond to them anymore. And this is where, I become this red tape, which is not exactly where I want to be. I want to be in a place where, like, guys, $5 spreadsheet, let's do it. But then I have to be like, what happened to that dollar? I don't want to have these conversations. Like, I come in this serial killer to a meeting and everyone's like, oh, Narghiza, come on, why are you here? I told you why. These conversations are unpleasant. And the worst conversation is when it's flipped. How did you let that dollar slip? You should have told him. You should have cut his card 3 years ago. Hang on. I didn't even know you gave him the card.
Yeah. That's the ownership problem, right? And that's
Yeah.
probably the episode. The spreadsheet is where the company hides the conversation it doesn't want to have, in a way. And then the finance becomes the bad guy because finance brings the receipt, right? But the receipt is not a problem. The behavior that created the receipt is the problem, right?
That's right. Yeah. And like I said, the worst part is the flipping the narrative is like, you should have, could have, would have. But I'm thinking, hang on a second. So here is a decision made that you authorize someone, to have a budget. Forget the card. You have a budget of 20,000, which you never had. The spreadsheet says 10. You've given him 20. He's gone and spent 20. Now you're asking me to go tell him off for spending 20. Can you imagine the structural tension this would create? Because I'm no longer a friend of the department. Guess what that's going to do? They will then continue to start entering into behaviors where they hide things from me. They don't tell me things on time. And I'll give you an example. Right? Someone got authorized, someone's got given a limit of 50 grand to spend on, purchase order level. So he's going to spend 50 grand. He's going to spend all of it. And all of a sudden, the person that authorized, like, well, I didn't know he's going to go spend it all at once. But when you told him, you didn't tell him do it in 12 months. He thought he would just go do it all at once. Do you know what I mean? You weren't clear. So the person that made that decision got really upset, and he's like, well, now tell him you can only do it at 10 grand a month. So I put a limit to the purchase order, and I said, once you exceed that, the system won't allow you. You need to wait. So guess what happens? He's used to now spending 50. He sees me as a problem, right? I'm the one that's come in and took his independence, and I'm the hindrance for him to run a successful business. So what he does is he creates 10 purchase orders or 5 purchase orders of 10 grand separately, and he still spends 50,000. Do you know what I mean? These are the kind of behaviors it fosters because you've made a mistake from the day dot. You've allowed for that to happen, and now you expecting me to retrain them within a week or a month. Retraining these behaviors would take a lot longer and would naturally create tension. So it is best to not to foster behaviors like this. Confront the person, train and mentor them correctly, be open and transparent. Then, like I said, it's not the greatest place for me to be coming in as a tough educator. Yeah.
Before we close, what should every CEO or COO understand about the person who brings the uncomfortable number in the room?
Yeah. Be okay with it. Be okay with it, because if all you see is good numbers and you do not want to believe that, numbers can't always be good or things did happen and it's not looking good, and you look for excuses that are legitimate excuses where you're involved in it as much as everyone else. Yeah. Deflection is the biggest problem. Don't. The biggest learning for everyone, including the top tier management, is working with the numbers, not against them. And it's hard, when you empower, when you kind of know what you're doing, it shouldn't happen. It's your business. I get it. It's hard, but deflection never helped the business. Never. Ownership did. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that part. And I think that's the right place to close in a way. For me, the takeaway is pretty simple. The spreadsheet doesn't usually create a problem, it reveals it, right? And if leaders only fix the file but don't fix the ownership, trust, or decision making underneath it, the same mess comes back eventually, right? Just cleaner, better formatted, right? Maybe with a dashboard this time.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. Can you share with us where we can find you, find your work, and where can people contact you?
Absolutely. The best place to find me is LinkedIn. I'm on a number of platforms doing a number of weird things, like you said. I'm one of those. But LinkedIn would be the place to find me for future opportunities, conversations, dialogues, just inspiration, if you like. Yeah, let's fail and learn together.
Exactly. You made finance feel very human, which I like, and I wanted to have a conversation because this was never really about spreadsheets, right? It was about what companies do when the numbers tell the truth in a way and how do they react on it. So thank you very much for your time here.
My pleasure, Marco. Lovely to meet you. And yeah, totally looking forward to future collaborations.